Welcome to the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival live stream. My name is Eric Hong, and I am a programmer and grant writer for PAF. I am also the executive director of the Music of Asian America Research Center, which is one of PAF's many partners, community partners. I will be moderating this evening's Filmmaker Q&A on a program about early 20th century Filipino-American history with the short film No Dogs and the feature documentary The Celine Archive. We'll be taking audience questions as well, so please make sure to type your audience questions into the comment section. Let's go around the virtual room and have our guests introduce themselves and their film. Randall, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name is Randall Camrad, and I'm the director of No Dogs.
Thank you. Georgina.
I'm Georgina Tolentino. I'm the co-writer, producer, and actor at No Dogs.
Great. And Alex, you're in both films, so.
I'm Alex Fabros. I sort of like a historical advisor to Georgina and historical commentator on Celine's film on the Celine Archives.
Great. Thank you. I see that Celine is here. Brett, can you bring her in as well? Hi, Celine. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Celine Parreñas Shimizu, producer director of the Celine Archive. So ecstatic to be in the same room with Alex Fabros and all of you.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We will start with No Dogs, but feel free to, you know each other's films, I think. So please speak, with each other as well as you see fit. So No Dogs discussed many complicated historical events from the Filipino-American War to the Philippine exhibition at the St. Louis World's Fair, and from the Watsonville riots to the Tidings-McDuffie Act that promised Philippine independence. How did you choose to tell this complicated history through a scene at the diner? Randall or Georgina?
I think that's a Georgina question. She really originated the story, and it was sort of her original concept she brought up was the diner being the nexus of this whole thing. So I'll leave it to you.
I think what really inspired me was trying to tell a larger story in a very relatable situation that's still relevant to today. And I think what was going on with the zeitgeist of our current world was the theme of microaggressions and kind of still not feeling, I believe, as a person of color, unequal in our American society. So I was wondering what would be an event where two people had to be stuck together, forced to be stuck together, and have very hard conversations, but still find some sort of blurry middle ground about their wants and desires. So I did a lot of research and was introduced to Alex by the Filipino-American Historical Society to research maybe doing a scene around the clubhouse at Stockton and a bombing that had happened at that time. So seeing how we could have two people stuck, one Filipino-American and a night rider who was part of this hate group that committed hate crimes at night. That was a white-led hate group throughout Central California that people don't really know about. Mm-hmm. So, and again, not revealed in the beginning, but over time. And I think that was my idea for it.
Mm-hmm. So if I can follow up with that a little bit, how do you develop the two characters once you had that idea?
I'm not necessarily, I would say, a trained writer. This was, I guess I went, well, what if I were to play these two roles? And I put myself even in the position of the night rider who was basically a white supremacy group in the 1920s to 30s. And so I would go, well, why would this person believe these things and ideologies? And that's why we had the idea of the World's Fair and his backstory. And Alex definitely helped shape that, of his father, the owner of the diner, being part of the Filipino-American War, and how that could affect a small child, taking him to the World's Fair earlier in that century. And then how he grew up having these really confusing feelings, because now he's running into someone and trapped with someone who doesn't seem so bad And I think that I'm fascinated in a way by people on the opposite side. I think a part of me was trying to have compassion for people that I felt like maybe don't deserve our compassion. And I think as artists, that's kind of a challenge to even find the humanity and where hate comes from, because I believe that even generational trauma is passed down, and even in our culture. And I was very fascinated in seeing, why are we so silent sometimes, even in these hate crimes being committed that are not reported? And even going back to this, what the Watsonville riots and the riots in Exeter and the Stockton House clubhouse bombing, this is a generation of the first round of Filipino-American immigrants coming into the United States. How is these dreams and ideas that they come with kind of get chipped away slowly over time? And also, how are they encouraged to also not necessarily speak up sometimes? Yet we do have these passions and beliefs and these talents and skill set that we came here to the United States wanting the same thing that this Knight Riders family did, which was a better life. And I think that's what I wanted to normalize, was seeing Filipino Americans and people of color in period pieces, because we're often not a part of the American story and the American diaspora. And I felt like something very simple, doing a scene of two people stuck together, would be something we could also do during COVID. So that was also one of the things, like, okay, we can't have the dance hall yet. So having that deep sense of history in a very short amount of time, I think that was my idea.
Okay, thank you. So, Randall, I think one of the most effective things about this film is that, through the conversations, and as Georgina alluded to this, sometimes the conversations point out how similar the two characters are, and other times the conversation points out how different the two characters are. So, as director, how did you read these moments, and how did you direct the actors?
Well, one of the big parts of this film is, since it was shot during COVID, we really had very little time on set. I mean, we only shot it in one single night, and so everything really was rehearsed very, very well beforehand. So I worked with Georgina and Ian rehearsing it, and we rehearsed it a couple times at a park. But for the most part, the two of them did a lot of the rehearsals sort of together. After all, Georgina had written the thing, so she was very, of course, in tune with every little nuance that needed to be captured. On set, it was really just a case of like, hey, we don't have the time to really dig in deep and try and pull things out now. Everything that's been done sort of was done beforehand, and we were shooting with two cameras, and we did several takes to make sure that they had ample opportunity to get a lot of chances at the material. I would say a big part of what helps really with their performances, aside from the rehearsals that we did and that they did on their own, was also our editor, Roy, who really worked hard to really find the best sort of moments and combine them in all sorts of ways. We had sufficient sort of coverage with the two cameras to really pull those performances out of it. So,
Great, wonderful. So this is maybe a spoiler moment if you haven't watched the film yet. Why did you choose to not have the gun go off at the end?
I had this idea. I had another version that it did, and I had a version where it didn't. And I thought that I actually wrote out also another version where I actually get caught. And I didn't want it to be too much of Get Out, the ending of Get Out. But I think what I loved about that movie was that when you see it happen, you go, oh, I get it. Even after all that, this guy's probably going to get be not the victim of it. He's going to look like the guy in trouble. And what I really wanted was, the gun, I think, is a symbol of the fear that people feel every day. And he felt that fear on the other end. And it not going off was a symbol of, we're never going to stoop down to your level, but I want you to feel this, and we had written fictionally, the character for Mintabera did not have a sister, but we wrote, excuse me, so that the audience would have a sense of stakes and have a sense of relationship to who this person was, losing a family member, which I think we read articles and sometimes we don't necessarily go, oh, this person was someone's brother, this person was someone's son, this person was someone's, could have been, should have, would have, and could never happen that have that life. And I think having him mean someone to someone can be more relatable. And so when that gun doesn't go off, that even though you took someone from me, though you are a person committing these hate crimes against my people, we will never stoop down to your level.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so let's move to the Celine Archives. First of all, to Celine, congratulations on your new job as Dean of the Arts Division at UC Santa Cruz. How are you enjoying your new position? I think you're muted, Celine, sorry.
Thank you. I love so much being in the position to help shape the culture of a major institution of higher education, especially because creative industries are so exclusive and inclusion makes art so much better.
Great. So both Celine and Alex, both of you have known the Celine Navarro story for a long time. Alex as, first of all, something that he wasn't sure was true and until his students discovered these articles. And Celine, you mentioned that you made this film, when you did, to help you work through the loss of your son. Now that 2 years have passed since you finished the film, can you talk about what the film has accomplished for you?
Well, it's such a great honor to work with Alex, who's a really important figure in Filipino-American community history, and you can tell from his consultation work with No Dogs and so many other films. So he's such a treasure in our community, and I really wanted to honor him, for the courage it took to publish the first article on the burying alive of Celine Navarro in 1932 by her own Filipino immigrant community in Northern California. It's been 2 years since a year and a half really since the film has been completed. And my hope is that it allows for us to recognize our capacity for suppressing stories of gendered violence in our community, so that we can make room, to understand that we may, prioritize these histories of racism in order to, defend our humanity. But we also need to recognize, the inequalities within our own homes and our own families.
Yeah, thank you so much. So has Celine Navarro's families watched the film?
They most definitely, watched the film, and as a scholar who's also an ethnographer as well as a filmmaker, it's a really great honor, to be adopted into a family, and it was my goal from the very beginning to align myself with, what Georgina said, the generational trauma that exists within our families and our communities, and I really wanted to prioritize that for them. When Alex's article came out in 1997, it was a lifeline for this family, who, for generations were asking, did that really happen? Could the people who knew our ancestor, kidnap her 3 times for weeks at a time, brutalize her, punish her in public, and ultimately, bury her alive, make her crawl on beans, that didn't work, so how could that happen in such a public way, And so when Alex's article came out, it was such a validation that it indeed happened, and it confirmed why they were so suspicious of other Filipinos, like when you walk around, you see other Filipinos, you ask them, where do I eat? Where are you from? Are you related? But for them, the primary question was, did you kill my grandmother? So it really became a question of who we are as a people, who we are as a community,
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So, for Alex, now you published that article in '97, and now 20 some years later, you're seeing it on screen. What is that process like?
Well, in '97, that article got me booted out of funds.
Wow.
I was a director, and so they retired me, which was rather shocking. But the article that I wrote was actually just an extract out of a sort of like a dissertation. I had received a fellowship to spend a year at Berkeley doing a pre-doc, and then I got a full scholarship to go to UC Santa Barbara. But what I learned from this, from writing and doing the research on Celine Navarro, was that you have to go and talk to the people who were involved. But those were shut out to me. I couldn't get to them because people within the community said, nope, you can't expose that story. It's going to hurt a lot of people. But at the same time, it brings comfort to the children of the victim to know how and why this happened. I thought that was more important than trying to suppress the story. I remember I received about close to a dozen phone calls saying, please don't publish it. Please don't publish it. But I asked them why. And it said, well, it's going to hurt some people. But at the same time, I said, well, someone got hurt. Why can't we tell the story and learn from it? It's all part of history. But 20 years later, Celine gave me a call and said, hey, Alex, I'm doing this project on the Celine Archives. And she said, would you like to participate? And I got to thinking about that one phone call that got me booted out of Fonz. I said, yeah, why not? Celine I can't say good. She's got this great reputation for her work, and she's very thorough. And I enjoyed working with her because she really dug deep into the story. It was amazing. She was able to, when people found out that she was working on Celine Archives, tapes that I knew existed, articles and papers that I knew existed, suddenly reappeared. And I believe Celine had access to some of that material for just a few days. And I understand that stuff has again disappeared. But Celine basically tells a wonderful story. She brings in her own hurt into the story, which is important. And then she shows that it's a story that let's put it this way, it brings closure to a family. And I thought that was important. When you look at it towards the end, they're gathered there where their grandmother or great grandmother lies buried in a pauper's grave, and they pay tribute to her because she might not have known what would happen to her children, but her children are there to pay their respects. And I thought that was the most important part of the film, was closure for the family.
Okay.
I think in some ways there's also a kind of closure. Well, maybe it's an opening actually in the community. What Alex was talking about in terms of whatever various hesitations people had about, digging up our dirty laundry, or how hard it is because it's so violent, it's so brutal, right? And I think, many of us have lived with this story for decades. Dorothy Cordova lived with this story for over 40 years. I lived with this story for over 20 years. In a real haunting, really living with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we're benefiting from, the Me Too movement, and the work of all the Filipino feminist, scholars and activists that were finally really able to say that this, of what she went through, and I think, maybe for me as a grieving mom and for us Filipinos, right, like our ghosts are so crazy. They're not like Casper, right? They're manananggal, they're capre, And, for me, having experienced the death of a loved one, especially a child, like I'm no longer afraid of ghosts. And maybe that's part of it too. that this story was really discussed almost like as a nightmare in our community. So many, like Alex was talking about when he visited the site where she was killed, it all really feels supernatural, for me too. Like when I went there, kind of spooky, right? But maybe because of having undergone death, death in life, like if your child dies, it's like you die too, like how can a child die, right? And I think it's that vein that Alex is also talking about, that contending with grief, that really brings our community together, because so many people in the film, I think, Jean Vangua, the most amazing poet, wrote an epic poem about Celine, was also able to really reckon, with that past. So there's something about a community reckoning that's happening on screen with the film that is really important too.
Yeah. So as Alex was talking about the articles and tapes that have disappeared again, I was looking at your eyes, Celine, and they just opened really wide. I don't know if either of you want to talk a bit more about that, or if you don't want to, that's perfectly fine. But I just want to. I just saw that reaction. I was like, okay,
I don't know. I
is
think
there
that's
more
my
that
Zoom
we should
face.
take in?
I think that's my Zoom face, like being on this platform for 21 months. No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like, one thing that happened when we were shooting on the boat with Alex was, there was this seal that was following us the whole time. Like, first of all, I didn't know like the Bay Area, like punctured all the way deep into Sacramento. So for those of you like in Philly who don't know, like, the Pacific Ocean goes deep. Like, it's hours into Sacramento.
Mhm.
And the whole time we were on the boat, there was the seal following us. And it was really scary because it looked like the long-haired woman swimming, following us, as we were going into the site where Celine was buried. So many things happened like that, and I don't know, maybe that is it. Maybe we were at the threshold where life and death coexist, in the making of the film. Things disappear and reappear. And all we could do was accept the fact and donate lumpia to the water.
Mhm. Yeah.
I can say one nice thing about working with Celine is that she feeds her crew very well. She asked me, what would it take for me to participate in her film? I said 100 lumpias. And there were
And did I come through, Alex?
You ate 101 lumpias.
Yeah, I don't know what the No Dogs crew is like, but we had a vegan Filipino catering.
Wow.
Yeah, that's impossible, right? If you're Filipino and you're vegan, they say have some pork on that because pork is a vegetable, But we had a really, just great time, celebrating our heritage and our food, Filipino vegans in the Bay Area,
Yeah. So one thing I really, really like about the Celine Archive is that it not only told the Celine Navarro story, but it also went deeply into the research process and into the problematic nature of archives and also the ephemeral nature of archives, as Alex just talked about. But I'm also thinking of, Dorothy Cordova talking about the lost tape, and then the fact that the Stockton branch of Fonz is stored in like a public storage space on, ground level, right? So those things could disappear with any flood, right? That type of thing, right? So how did you choose how much of the research process to put into the film and the structure of the film?
I wish I could have put more in, right? Because it's so fulfilling to be able to touch the archives, like the documents, that the Filipino Americans required of each other, like the ritualistic baptism, that they made each other endure, because 1920s 30 Stockton, was as the late great Don Mabalan, the historian, shared, is mostly a community of young people, and they were inventing rituals that made them feel belonging, and it was intense seeing just the pages and pages of very formal documentation that registered this ritual, of you do this and I will forgive you, you do this and you will belong. It was very ceremonial, very like intensely Catholic tradition somehow redone, very, very dramatic. And what was amazing was, I had 10 San Francisco State School of Cinema students, where Alex also taught in the 90s. And, we went everywhere, the Bank of Stockton archives, the Library of Congress, and there's such a joy and pleasure in really empowering young people to claim their history, and understand it. And there's so much more that we don't know, that we need to know and, make films about. That's why, both narrative and nonfiction.
Yeah, thank you. So another decision I found to be really interesting is that you chose not to name the perpetrators, or even the people who went on trial, right? So can you talk about that decision a little bit?
I really wanted to align myself with, addressing the pain of the family. It's been 90 years since this happened. Any truth and reconciliation would have happened, in the past decades. But what I do know is that this family, understands the death and the brutality as if it happened yesterday. So I was going to protect the family, and I was not going to delve into the salacious and say there's this, battle of equal stories. What we know are the stories, in the New York Times and the LA Times, the newspapers in London and Singapore, which rendered Filipinos as savage, rapacious, brutal people who did not deserve citizenship in this country. But what we don't know are the stories of the family. So I wanted to prioritize that. And guess how they told their story? They wanted to do push-ups in honor of their grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Who would have thought that, that's how they wanted to speak, was to testify to their physical power, that they inherited, from her inner strength and what she survived. So, I mean, that's the power of cinema, right? Is to be able to tell the story through the behaviors, of the people, which is why I love the filmmaker Ramona Diaz, right? The great Filipino-American filmmaker Ramona Diaz, who pays attention to behaviors and not just like the spoken language of what does our pain look like? What does our survival look like? So I think that's the awesome closing of the film, the push-ups at the end to honor Celine Navarro.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I hope that you saw the our audience member Teresa's comment. Lumpia should be the currency, right? So yes, thank you so much to Randall, to Georgina, to Alex, and to Celine for joining us tonight. We're coming to the end of our time here, and thank you to our audience for joining tonight. Can all the filmmakers here tell us a little bit more about where we can find more of your work online, in bookstores, and in cinemas? Why don't we start with Randall?
You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at Monsters Without, which is my feature film that just premiered at the LA Asian Pacific Film Festival, and we're continuing our film festival run. We should have an announcement tomorrow for where we're going to be in December. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Georgina.
Social media is Georgina Tolentino on Instagram, and I've got several other historical projects going on, and yeah, that's where you'll find updates on that. Thank you.
Okay, great. Alex.
I've loaded a lot of our research, my students' research, my own research into Facebook at a site called Filipino-American Experience Research Project. And so if you go into the files section, you can find the original thesis for Celine Navarro there to read, as well as some of the other stuff that my students put together.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And Celine.
You can find me on Twitter at Celine Shimizu. I'm currently finishing a new book on called The Movies of Racial Childhoods, and it's coming out from Duke University Press. And I just finished production on a new documentary called 80 Years Later. And it's about the racial inheritance of Japanese Americans in the aftermath of family incarceration in World War II.
Great. Sorry, for Celine and Randall, you just typed it in. Can you type it in the comments? The private chat only goes to me. So please type in the comment section and our audience will see that. So thank you so much to everyone who attended this virtual Q&A. The Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival is hybrid this year, with more than 100 films available streaming online and 6 in-person events held at Asian Arts Initiative. You can find more about this year's festival and purchase tickets at path.org. I'm Eric Hong. Good night. Thanks.
Got me